As part of the Apollo program, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, of the United States sent a total of 12 astronauts to the surface of the moon between the years 1969 and 1972. However, despite numerous later policy endeavors by the American presidents, there has been no human landing on the moon in the decades that have passed since the Apollo 11 mission. Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. Today we'll be looking at this is why NASA never returned to the moon. Yeah, you heard it right. The United States incurred significant financial losses as a result of its participation in the Apollo program. Although different historical sources provide different estimates for how much the program cost, the majority of scholars agree that it was at least $20 billion in 1973 dollars, or around $116 billion in 2019 money. In total, in the middle of the 1960s, when it was at the height of its power, NASA accounted for approximately 4% of yearly federal spending. In more recent times, however, that percentage is close to 0.5%. At first, NASA intended to send human missions to the moon through the Apollo 20 program, and then use the technology developed for those missions to adapt it for use in other kinds of exploration through the Apollo Applications Program, the AAP. However, due to reductions in funding from Congress, the Apollo 17 mission, which marked the end of the moon program, was brought forward in 1972. The majority of AAP's programs, with the notable exception of the space station Skylab, were cancelled. There are a lot of different reasons why Congress decided to cut NASA's funding. The space race, which was a competition between the United States and the Soviet Union to demonstrate scientific and military superiority to other countries, was the driving force behind the decision to travel to the moon for the first time. However, as the 1960s progressed, the atmosphere of competitiveness gave way to detente, and as a result, there was no longer a pressing need to invest in NASA. Other public objectives were also coming to the forefront at this time, the most prominent of which was the costly Vietnam War, which demanded a significant portion of the funding that the federal government had available. After the first human landing on the moon, which occurred on July 20th, 1969, with Apollo 11, public interest in space began to wane. Space historians Roger D. Lannis and Howard E. McCurdy further argue in their 1997 book Spaceflight and the Myth of Presidential Leadership, the Apollo rose because of a unique circumstance. Specifically, US President John F. Kennedy pursued the space program and the moon landings as one of the chief policies of the United States, due to concern about Soviet military capabilities. After the detente, NASA and its programs moved to ancillary policy and have remained there ever since. In line with congressional desires, NASA's priorities changed in the coming decades, and its more limited human spaceflight money went to projects other than moon exploration. The next major initiative after Apollo was the partially reusable space shuttle, whose 5 space vehicles flew 135 missions between 1981 and 2011. NASA also worked on various space station concepts that eventually culminated in it contributing to the International Space Station, the ISS, whose first pieces were launched in 1998. The ISS was built partly as a science laboratory and partly as an international policy platform, especially with Russia, which was then a new nation and just establishing itself after the collapse of the Soviet Union. 3 presidents have proposed new moon initiatives over the decades, but most ideas were abandoned due to funding and waning congressional will. These were George H.W. Bush's Space Exploration Initiative to land humans by the turn of the century, and George W. Bush's vision for space exploration, advocating for moon missions by 2020. Both initiatives were terminated shortly after each president finished his term. The current administration of Donald Trump has 2 major moon initiatives planned: the Gateway Lunar Space Station and Project Artemis, aiming for human landings by the year 2024. In June 2019, NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine told reporters that the new moon landings under Project Artemis could cost NASA between $20 billion and $30 billion in current day dollars. This would be much cheaper than the cost of Apollo, pegged in excess of $115 billion. Besides the United States and the Soviet Union, no nation in the 1960s had space programs sufficiently advanced to consider human moon landings. In recent years, however, China, India, Japan, Russia, and the other countries within the European Space Agency have all publicly speculated on future moon landings. NASA is soliciting its ISS partners for Artemis and Gateway collaborations. Canada is the only partner to commit. It has signed on to provide robotics to the Gateway. Any country or agency that does choose to land people on the moon will need to accept a certain amount of risk and budgetary commitment. Human moon landings require more resources than robotic landings, since humans require water, oxygen, food, and other amenities to remain alive. That said, several nations, including private companies from those nations, are working on robotic moon initiatives that could support future human missions. So that's all from today's video. If you enjoyed it, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and ring that bell icon so that you never miss our upcoming videos. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments section below. Stay tuned, and we'll catch you in the next video.